According to the polls, which should obviously be taken with an enormous pinch of salt, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin's approval ratings have hovered around the 85% mark. Putin's numbers have apparently held up through thick and thin. They only really suffered after his partial mobilisation back in September 2022, and even then they recovered almost immediately. However, in the past couple of weeks, a number of pollsters, including, interestingly, some state-affiliated ones, have started to show a sudden decline. So, in this video, we thought we'd take a look at the latest data and try our best to figure out why Putin's approval ratings are finally dropping. Hint, it's got less to do with Ukraine than you might think. The next issue of our magazine is out very soon, with this issue focusing on all of the wars Trump's been involved in during his second term, with each dot on the cover representing a different military intervention or strike. Inside, we run through each of the conflicts from Venezuela and Iran to Yemen and Ecuador, as well as us discussing what he's really doing. Pre-order your copy at toolong.news. So the first thing to say is that, of course, polls in Russia should be viewed with some skepticism. Response rates are generally pretty low, and there will obviously be a degree of self-censorship amongst those who do respond, because, well, telling a stranger on the phone that you disapprove of Putin or the government isn't exactly a risk-free exercise in Russia, especially if you're talking to a state-affiliated pollster. Furthermore, even if people are willing to express their opinions, it's worth keeping in mind that those opinions will have been influenced by state propaganda, given that most of the media in Russia is either owned by the Kremlin or a Kremlin-friendly oligarch. Nonetheless, this doesn't mean that polls are entirely useless. Rather, while they're probably not great at telling you what Putin's approval ratings actually are, and they almost definitely overstate it, they can tell you whether it's going up or down. In other words, Russian polling is more like a compass than a map. It can tell you which direction public opinion is moving, but not exactly where it stands. And, well, there's now a lot of data to suggest that Putin's approval rating is indeed going down. According to the Levada Center, for instance, widely regarded as Russia's most credible independent pollster, Putin's approval rating has fallen about 8 points in the past few months, to 79%, its lowest since September 2022, when Putin ordered a partial mobilization. Conversely, the percentage of Russians saying they disapprove of Putin has hit an 18-month high of 16%. Something similar has happened to the Russian government and Prime Minister, who've both also seen their net approval ratings slump. Even state-affiliated pollsters admit something similar. The latest poll by the Kremlin-affiliated Public Opinion Foundation, for instance, found that Putin's approval rating had fallen to 73% in late April, the lowest since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Similarly, the latest poll by the state-owned Russian Public Opinion Research Center has Putin's approval rating at 66%. Again, the lowest reading since February 2022. So, what's going on? Why are Putin's approval ratings ticking down? Well, if you don't live in Russia, you might assume, not unreasonably, that this is all about the war in Ukraine. After all, it's true that the Russian army is struggling on the battlefield, and have made basically zero territorial gains in the past 3 months. Ordinary Russians are at least somewhat aware of this, which is presumably why the percentage of Russians saying it's time for peace talks has reached an all-time high of 67% in Levada Center polling. Furthermore, war-related spending has wrought havoc on the Russian economy, which has suffered from persistently high inflation and interest rates for the past couple of years, and is now looking at stagnant GDP growth. However, while Russia's woes in Ukraine won't be helping Putin, the main reason for his poll slump is actually the Kremlin's recent tech crackdown. For context, over the past several weeks, the Kremlin has been tightening its control over the internet in Russia. This has involved cracking down on VPNs and imposing intermittent regional internet blackouts, nominally justified on Ukraine-related national security grounds, during which affected users can only access a handful of approved websites. At the same time, the Kremlin has also banned a number of foreign platforms, including YouTube, which has been under soft restrictions since 2024, and perhaps most notably, Telegram. For those of you who don't know, Telegram is an encrypted messaging app that is, or at least used to be, by far and away the most popular messenger in Russia, with 105 million monthly users, about 70% of Russia's overall population. Telegram CEO and founder is a guy called Pavel Durov, who was born in the Soviet Union but left Russia in 2014 after the Kremlin forced him to sell his stake in VK, a social media company Durov founded in 2006, which quickly became Russia's most popular social network. Durov reacted by leaving Russia and creating Telegram, which he's since cast as a privacy-first alternative. Unsurprisingly, Durov has a testy relationship with the Kremlin, who first tried to ban Telegram back in 2018, although they eventually backed down after a public uproar. Anyway, this time the Kremlin has accused Telegram of essentially leaking Russian data to Ukraine and NATO to help them attack Russia. There might be something to this, although we should say that Telegram denies the accusations, and we can't find any evidence of it happening. But the real reason the Kremlin is trying to ban Telegram is probably just that they want more power to surveil and control Russia's information space. This would also explain why they're instead trying to divert users towards Max, a state-run messaging app that apparently doesn't really work, and why they tried the same trick back in 2018, which was obviously before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This theory would also be consistent with recent reporting from Russian dissident outlets, which claim that the FSB, Russia's security agency, has started to exert more influence inside Roskomnadzor, Russia's digital watchdog, which is responsible for most of these new restrictions. Anyway, these restrictions have proved incredibly inconvenient for ordinary Russians, undermining their ability to perform even simple online tasks like ordering a cab or using mobile payment systems, which is probably the main reason Putin's taking some flack in the polls at the moment. But they've also sparked fears that the Kremlin might be moving away from what we might describe as a blacklist attitude to the internet, where Russians only have to stay off a handful of blacklisted sites, to what we might call a whitelist attitude, where Russians would only be allowed to use certain state-sanctioned platforms and websites. This would obviously be unpopular in and of itself, but it would also represent a violation of Russian journalist Masha Lipman once termed the No Participation Pact. In short, one of the central elements and appeals of Putinism is this implicit social contract between Putin and the Russian public, where the public stays out of politics and doesn't complain about Putin's monopoly on power, and, in return, the Kremlin basically stays out of people's day-to-day lives and provides a degree of stability and prosperity. This social contract is already fraying with the war in Ukraine and the subsequent economic disruption, but moving towards a whitelist system would represent an escalation in this direction. As I mentioned, the next issue of Too Long is out very soon, and if you subscribe using promo code SUMMER26 at checkout, you'll get 20% off every copy as long as you stay subscribed, plus an additional £3 off your first copy. It's not just Trump's wars and conflicts though. The summer issue of Too Long contains news from each region, including pieces from elections around the world, including the UK, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovenia and Denmark, a piece on if we're heading into a new world war, the Euro's missing members, an update on what's happening following the Gen Z protests of last year, as well as a rundown of Trump's continued threat towards Greenland. Speaking of Greenland, if you didn't already know, we visited Greenland earlier in the year to film a series called What's the Big Deal with Greenland? While there, we explored the vast impenetrable country, camped on a glacier, and drove out to the US's abandoned military bases. The first episode will be out soon, with all episodes exclusively available to TLDR Party members. You can learn more about TLDR Party by clicking the link in the description, but the cheapest way to sign up is in a bundle with Too Long. So if you are going to subscribe to the latest issue of the magazine, consider grabbing yourself a TLDR Party membership at the same time.